It's common knowledge in the capital's social circles. The Jiang family's young lady suffers from severe bipolar disorder and hyperacusis. Anyone who saw her had to walk on their knees, afraid that the slightest sound would set her off. But my parents, to pay off their debts, they brought me back overnight from the countryside, where I'd been raised for 18 years, to be given to the young lady. Day 1. The butler explained to me the Jiang family's rules. First and most importantly, no noise whatsoever is permitted. The young lady is hypersensitive to sound. Any loud noise will make her extremely agitated. The last servant who broke a cup was thrown to the wolves in the back mountains. My heart skipped a beat. My face went even paler. The butler raised his hand and pointed towards the dim, shadowy end of the staircase. And under no circumstances are you to go to the 3rd floor. That is a forbidden area. No matter what you hear, do not go up there, unless you want to. The butler's warning was completely devoid of emotion, but it was more spine-chilling than any beating or scolding. I nodded obediently. Remember that. The butler seemed satisfied with my compliance. He led me to a guest room at the end of the hallway on the 2nd floor. Mr. Hu, have a good night. Remember, don't go out at night. The door closed, shutting out the butler's pair of lifeless eyes. The room was huge, but there was only a bed and a cabinet. It was as cold and desolate as a morgue. I didn't dare to turn on the main light, leaving only a dim, yellow bedside lamp on. I didn't take a hot shower, afraid the sound of the water would be too loud. I had broken a taboo. I just used a taboo to quickly dry my hair and body, and change into a long-sleeved cotton pajama set. I brought that with me. The clothes. I've shooed them with my special calming incense. Only when I breathe in this faint scent of herbs, my heart, which is always in my throat, can finally settle down a little. I curled up under the covers, clasping my hands together. I tried to comfort myself, as if I were hypnotizing my own mind. That's right, Gu Yangqin. Once the debt is paid, I can leave. Thunder rumbled outside the window. I had a very restless night. I don't know how much time had passed. A loud crash. It exploded out of nowhere in the dead of the night. It wasn't like thunder, more like a heavy object. The sound of something being slammed hard against a wall, with enough force to destroy everything. I jolted awake. My whole body bolted upright in bed. Before I could even react, then, right after, came another sharp crack. The sound of expensive porcelain being swept to the floor. The sound of it shattering into 1,000 pieces. The sound was coming from the 3rd floor, directly above. And then, cutting through it all, was a woman's roar, piercing through the floorboards and echoing down. The voice was hoarse. It was a sound of agony, on the verge of complete collapse. Like a wild beast trapped in a cage, a beast that had completely lost its mind. The once deathly silent Jian Yuan estate suddenly sprang to life. All the lights in the entire villa suddenly blazed to life. A chaotic yet deliberately muffled sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. I was huddled in the corner of the bed, wrapped in a blanket, shivering uncontrollably. Even through the floorboards, I could still feel the immense fury and destructive urge radiating from that woman. So this is the legendary young lady of the Golden Circle. So, this is the forbidden place the butler was talking about. Faintly from outside the door, I could hear the muffled sobs of a maid and the butler's urgent low shout for a sedative. Quick! Get the doctor. The young ladies had another episode. Butler, no one dares to go up there. Going up there is suicide. Even if it's a suicide mission, someone has to go, or, well, all die. In the chaos, I could smell it in the air. A faint scent began to fill the air. I held the small medicine box in my arms, clutching it for dear life. Her knuckles turned white from the force of her grip. The hallway was in utter chaos. I pushed the door open. I saw several maids in uniform huddled together at the top of the stairs, their faces deathly pale, holding a tray in their hands, and the medicine bowls on the trays. The contents of the bowls clanked together with the trembling of their hands. Shen Su Song, I don't dare to go. Fei Fi went in last time and got his head busted open. I don't dare either. The young lady's got a knife in her hand right now. The servants shoved each other. No one dared to make the first move. The old butler stood to the side, with a deep frown. His face was so grim, it could make it rain. Suddenly, his gaze landed on me, standing in the doorway. I was panicking. In that instant, a glint of gold flashed in the butler's previously lifeless eyes. The butler hurried over. He didn't even give me a moment to react. He snatched the tray right out of the maid's hands and shoved it into my arms. The pills were scorching hot. The heat made my fingers flinch, but she didn't let go. The butler's voice was cold and hard. His tone was an undeniable command. Mr. Gu, now that you're here at the Jiang residence, you must learn the rules of the Jiang family. The young lady's headache is acting up. Here are the sedatives and the calming soup. Take them upstairs. I stared at him in disbelief. But you just said the 3rd floor is off limits. Then what was the point of Mr. Gu and his family sending you here in the first place? You know perfectly well. If anything happens to the young lady tonight, Do you really think the Gu family will ever see their money? Those words hit me like a slap in the face, slapping me hard across the face. I was a debt payment. If it's broken, it can be replaced. If I die, they can just pay the price. But Jiang Wanning couldn't be allowed to come to harm. I glanced down at the medicine in my arms. Then I looked up again at the pitch-black stairwell on the 3rd floor. I knew it. My voice trembled, but my feet moved forward all the same. The 3rd floor was unlit. With one step, I was inside. It was as if he had stepped into another world. The light from behind was swallowed by the darkness. The air was thick with the heavy, sickening stench of blood, and an indescribable, chilling aura, like the den of some wild beast. A bolt of lightning split the night sky outside the window. The pale, blinding flash of lightning instantly illuminated a corner of the room. I gasped. The once lavish study now looked as if it had been hit by a tornado. The priceless blue and white porcelain from the Ming dynasty was now nothing but a pile of shards on the floor. The priceless mahogany desk had been overturned. The books that once lined the walls were now torn to shreds, scattered like corpses, everywhere. And that woman, she was nowhere in sight. My heart was in my throat. I was carrying a tray. I tried to tiptoe as much as I could, trying to avoid the mess on the floor. I placed the medicine on the coffee table that was still in one piece, just a step or two more. I held my breath. But just as I was about to set the tray down, a faint, sharp crack shattered the dead silence of the darkness. My entire body froze. Beneath my foot was a shard of porcelain that had been missed, snapped in two beneath my shoe. The sound wasn't loud. It was even softer than the rain outside. But for Jiang Wanning, who suffers from hyperacusis, to her it was nothing short of a deafening clap of thunder. Breathing from the depths of the darkness suddenly stopped. My scalp tingled. The kind of fear you feel when you're locked in the sights of an apex predator, coursing through my entire body in an instant. Instinctively, I tried to back away. I wanted to run. A voice cold as ice cut through the shadows. "Who's there?" Before I could even see clearly, a fierce gust of wind, reeking of blood, was already upon me. The tray in my hands was knocked flying. The medicine bowl shattered on the floor. Before I could even let out a scream, an ice-cold, pale hand was already clamped tightly around my throat. An immense, brutal force slammed my entire body hard against the wall. By the light of another flash of lightning from outside the window, and at last, I saw the woman before me clearly. The black camisole revealed her delicate collarbones. Her usually cool and noble face was now twisted with menace. Her narrow, phoenix-like eyes were completely unfocused. There was only a terrifying, blood-red glow. It was the madness that comes when reason has completely shattered. At this moment, Jiang Wanning wasn't a person. She was a demon freshly crawled from the depths of hell. He's staring at me, as if staring at a lifeless object. "Who let you in? You're asking for a death wish." As he demanded an answer, the hand around my throat squeezed tighter and tighter. My face instantly turned beet red. The air in my lungs was being squeezed out bit by bit. I desperately tried to pry her hand off me, but that hand was like a vice grip. It didn't budge an inch. The fear of death consumed me, but my instinct for survival kicked in. It made me want to scream. I wanted to scream for help. But just as the sound was about to burst from my throat, the old butler's sinister warning exploded in my mind like a clap of thunder. "No noise is to be made, or you'll die without even being able to scream. Scream, and you'll die even faster." I choked back the scream that was clawing its way out of my throat. As I grew dizzy from suffocation, with my right hand, the only one I could still move, I trembled as I reached into my pajama pocket. It was my last and only hope. A Storax pill, no larger than my thumb, sealed within a ball of beeswax. It's an ancient formula my grandfather left behind before he died, specially formulated for financial frenzy and soul loss syndrome. Because the process is incredibly intricate, and in the end, this is the only one I managed to make, always by my side. With the tip of my finger, the one thing that could save my life, I touched the cold, waxy shell with the very last ounce of my strength and crushed the wax in a sudden, violent motion. But a crisp, cool scent, yet it carried a strange, sweet, milky scent of herbs. And in an instant, it exploded in the incredibly narrow space between us. I threw caution to the wind, holding the crushed incense pellet aloft and shoved it right under Jiang Wanning's nose. Meanwhile, my hand moved up to her stiff neck, drawing on the muscle memory from my years of practicing medicine and precisely pressed on the two thumping sleep acupressure points behind her ears. A pained grunt escaped from Jiang Wanning's throat. I didn't dare stop applying pressure, while letting the fragrance drift into his nose, all while using a special finger technique. She even pressed relentlessly on his temples, completely ignoring his discomfort. 1 second. 2 seconds, and then a miracle happened. That unique, medicinal fragrance aggressively overwhelmed the room's thick stench of blood and tobacco. Jiang Wanning's fingers, which had been tightening their grip, suddenly froze as if someone had hit the pause button. The frenzied killing intent in her crimson, turbid eyes began to slowly dissipate. Jiang Wanning's lips quivered, a sound. Her voice was so hoarse it was barely a whisper. The excruciating pain that had tormented her for years was finally fading away. In its place, an all-encompassing wave of comfort washed over him, one that made his very soul tremble. This scent. It's so fragrant. I just want to get a little closer. The next second, the grip on my neck was completely gone. Jiang Wanning let go. Then, the woman who had just been like a demon from hell. As if all the bones had been pulled from her body collapsed forward without any warning. It just managed to gasp for a breath of fresh air. Before I could even cough, the sudden weight threw me completely off balance. I landed flat on my ass on the thick wool carpet, and the high society princess of Beijing was now lying completely on top of me, and that noble head of hers buried itself heavily in the crook of my neck. I was so scared my whole body went stiff. Miss Jiang. My hands were just hovering in the air. I couldn't push her away, but I couldn't hold her either. Nor was I. I could feel it. Jiang Wanning's body was burning up, terrifyingly hot. That was a high fever from her bipolar episode. But right now, he was being unbelievably docile. That lunatic who normally sleeps with a knife in her hand. Right now, she's like a feline with a desperate craving for touch, and keeps nuzzling her cheek against my neck. He's searching for the source of that scent. I just crushed that scented pill in my hand. Plus, I had just taken a shower. I already have a faint, natural scent on me. The two scents mingled together, and just like that, it became the most addictive poison Jiang Wanning had ever smelled. Jiang Wanning's hand tightened its grip subconsciously and wrapped her arms around my waist. Don't move. He took a deep breath. The tip of his nose pressed against the pulsing vein on the side of my neck and let out a satisfied, husky sigh. The way he was inhaling my scent made my skin crawl. I didn't dare to move a muscle. A few seconds passed, but the explosive rage I was bracing for never came. Instead, what reached his ears was the sound of the woman's breathing, gradually steadying, and even the sound of her somewhat heavy breathing. She's asleep. In this study, she had just smashed to pieces, in a study that looked like a war zone. In the arms of the stranger, she had almost strangled to death. This young lady who had been suffering from severe insomnia, and just like that, the young lady who supposedly hadn't slept for 3 days and 3 nights was out like a light. The first rays of morning sun streamed in through the shattered floor-to-ceiling window, illuminating the scattered fragments of antique porcelain on the floor and the two figures entwined together in the corner. I was awakened by a heavy pressure on my legs. I groggily opened my eyes. My whole body ached as if it had been run over by a truck, especially my legs, which had long since gone numb. They were so numb, it was like they weren't even mine. In the instant my memory came flooding back, I gasped, a sharp intake of breath, and resting on my thigh was a head of black hair. It was Jiang Wanning, the infamous socialite of the capital, whose name alone strikes fear into hearts. Right now, she's lying on her side on the carpet. Her head was pillowed on my lap, her face almost completely buried in my stomach. She was sleeping soundly. Her breathing was long and steady. That face, so demonic and terrifying just last night. Now, in the morning light, her face had a sickly pallor, looking almost docile. If you ignore the ruins all around us, the scene was beautiful, like a painting. But I didn't dare to move, because I realized that one of Jiang Wanning's hands was clutching the corner of my pajamas, refusing to let go. Is this what they call skin hunger? I swallowed hard. I tried to carefully pry the corner of my shirt from her vice-like grip. I gingerly moved my fingers to pry her hand open, but the very instant my fingertips brushed against the back of her hand, those tightly shut, phoenix-like eyes snapped open without warning. My heart stopped. My hand froze in midair. I wanted to pull back, but I didn't dare to. You're awake. I was terrified this lunatic would snap and strangle me again at any second. Jiang Wanning didn't say a word. He was still lying there, his head on my lap. She didn't even move a muscle. Her eyes were locked onto my face, unblinking. My legs gone completely numb. I couldn't help but instinctively try to pull back. Jiang Wanning's brows furrowed slightly. She seemed displeased that the source of warmth was moving away from her. Who said you could move? The next second, he did something that made my whole body freeze. Not only did he not get up, instead, he suddenly shot his hand up and clamped it around my wrist, yanking my entire body forward. Caught off guard, my upper body lurched forward, and my face. I almost slammed into the tip of her nose. Miss Jiang. Jiang Wanning ignored my panic. The tip of her nose pressed against the thin skin on the inside of my wrist and took a deep breath in. That's where I crushed the Suhei incense pill last night. Even after a whole night had passed, that crisp, cool scent of herbs still lingers in the very pores of my skin. It's the only scent that can quiet her mind. In an instant, the light in Jiang Waning's eyes dimmed. The terrifying possessiveness in her eyes was no longer concealed. So, it was you. In this moment, charged with the utmost ambiguity, and yet an incredibly dangerous one. The heavy study door was carefully pushed open from the outside. The old butler's hushed voice came from outside. Be gentle. Is the body bag ready? We're going in. Move quickly. Don't get blood on the carpet.
Right after, the butler entered with the Jiang family's private doctor, and 2 bodyguards carrying a stretcher and cleaning supplies, and tiptoed in. They were all bracing themselves for what they were about to see. After all the commotion last night, Gu Yanlin was probably long gone by now, or had his neck snapped, or had his throat slit by shards of porcelain. However, when the group rounded the screen and got a clear view of the room, the sound of everyone's footsteps came to an abrupt halt. The butler's cloudy old eyes widened in disbelief. His jaw nearly hit the floor. The doctor's stethoscope clattered to the carpet. What was it that they saw? In the center of the devastated ruins, their young lady who had always been violent and misogynistic, the young lady who would kill anyone who dared to touch her, was now acting like a clingy little kitten, lazily snuggling in my arms. With one hand, he grips my wrist, in such an intimate pose, as if I were his personal body pillow. And me, the one who should have been long gone, was blushing, looking helplessly towards the door. These people looked as if they'd seen a ghost. Had your fill. But Jiang Wanning showed no intention of getting up. He didn't even bother to turn his head. She remained in the position, resting her head on my lap. She merely lifted her eyelids, ever so languidly. Get out. The butler jolted. A cold sweat broke out instantly. Forgive us, miss. We're leaving right away. The group arrived as quickly as they had come, and left even faster. The door was closed again. Once again, it was just the 2 of us in the room. I felt like I was being roasted over a fire. I tried to pull my hand back. Miss Jiang, they're all gone. Could you please get up first? My legs completely asleep. Jiang Wanning finally let go of my wrist. He leisurely sat up from the carpet. Her black silk slip dress was wrinkled and clinging to her body. Yet it did nothing to diminish her air of aristocratic decadence. She raised her hand and rubbed her temples. The splitting headache that felt like my brain was being torn apart last night was gone. In its place was a long-lost sense of clarity. It was the first time in 3 years he had gotten a full 5 hours of sleep. Jiang Wanning turned her head. Her gaze fell upon me again as I was struggling to massage my leg. He looked so weak and easy to push around, but also incredibly resilient. He's my medicine. Jiang Wanning reached out and gently hooked her finger under my chin, my legs asleep. The corner of his lips curled into a faint, ambiguous smile. Since it's numb, then you don't have to leave. What opportunity did the Gu family ever give you? You're the one who walked in here. Jiang Wanning loosened her grip. Her fingertips trailed down my face. Finally, it came to rest on my neck, right where her fingers had left marks from the night before. Her touch was gentle, as if she were caressing a rare, precious treasure. From this day forward, you will be staying in this room, and you're not going anywhere. The air in the room seemed to freeze. After Jiang Wanning said that, she fell silent. She stood up from beside me and walked away. Her bare feet stepped onto the trampled carpet. She walked over to the one sofa that had survived the chaos. He picks up the black suit jacket draped over it and leisurely put it on. Finally, he picked up a string of cold white jade Bodhi beads from the coffee table. Jiang Wanning wrapped it around and around her left wrist. With great difficulty, I pulled myself up by the cabinet. My legs were still numb from being pressed down for so long, and were still tingling. I looked at the woman before me, who had now calmed down. I took a deep breath. I mustered up my courage, and broke the silence. Miss Jiang, I delivered it last night as you requested, and your headache has eased as well. Does this mean I can go now? Jiang Wanning's hand, which was adjusting her clothes, paused for a moment. She turned around. Those cool phoenix-like eyes landed on me faintly from a distance of a few meters. Go back where? The Gu family? My fingers curled slightly. That's none of your concern, as long as I've paid off the debt. Jiang Wanning looked as if she just heard the most ridiculous joke. He casually pulled a thin sheet of paper from a stack of documents on the coffee table. My eyelid twitched. I recognized that paper. It was the debt settlement agreement signed by my stepmother, and my ticket to servitude. The stark black and white with that astronomical figure of tens of millions, weighing down on me like a mountain, weighing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Jiang Wanning held the paper between 2 of her fingers, and casually waved it in the air. When the Gu family sent you here, and gave me this thing. Gu Yanting. So, you're a medical student too. You should know what equivalent exchange means, right? My heart sank. A sense of foreboding washed over me. The next moment, a sharp metallic clink rang out. Jiang Wanning. With her other hand, she pulled out a silver lighter. My pupils constricted. What are you doing? Jiang Wanning didn't answer. He
Instead, she just brought the IOU worth tens of millions closer to the flame. The flames instantly devoured the paper. Instinctively, I lunged forward. I wanted to snatch it back, but that's mine. But it was all too late. The paper burned rapidly. In just a few seconds, it turned to ash in Jiang Wanning's fingers.
The last spark flickered out. I'll stay right here. I was completely thunderstruck. Jiang Wanning dusted off her hands, as if brushing away non-existent ashes. Her tone was so casual, as if she were just talking about the weather. Now, the Gu family doesn't owe me anything. I stared blankly at the spot where the ashes on the floor had vanished. So, does that mean I'm free? I looked up. My voice trembled, with a glimmer of hopeful disbelief. What do you mean? You mean I can go? Jiang Wanning let out a soft, low laugh, with a hint of spine-chilling pleasure and mockery. He strode forward, his long legs eating up the distance, walking towards me step by step. Lu Yuanqing, have you been hitting the book so hard you've gone stupid? I burned the IOU. It's because I don't need the money. But that doesn't mean you can leave. But then, Jiang Wanning cut me off. You cured my headache. For a patient, you're the only cure for me. How could you just take off like that? My body went rigid. A chill shot up from the soles of my feet to the top of my head. He's trying to skip out on the debt. No, it's not about the debt. He wants to have Miss Jiang all to himself. I'm a person. It's not medicine. And I have a name. My name is Gu Yanlin. Jiang Wanning's fingers gently pinched my earlobe, pinching and twisting it absent-mindedly. I knew the moment the name Gu Yanlin slipped from her crimson lips. Her voice trailed off, the syllables deliberately drawn out, in a way that was both lingering and full of unspoken emotion. It was so sweet it could get you pregnant. The tips of my ears instantly burned bright red. It was a reaction born from humiliation and fury. Jiang Wanning's playful expression vanished. Her gaze instantly turned cold and domineering, in a tone that brooked no argument. Listen to me, from this day forward. You're one of Jiang Yuan's men. You have only one task, and that is to cure my illness. He withdrew his hand and straightened up. It was like a final verdict had been passed. The butler will move all of your things to the 3rd floor. From now on, you'll be living right next to me. My eyes widened. But isn't the 3rd floor off limits? Jiang Wanning turned and walked out. The cold, white jade prayer beads on her wrist glimmered with a soft, lustrous sheen in the morning light. As she reached the doorway, his footsteps faltered for a moment. He tilted his head to the side and said something that shattered my last hope. That's for other people, but for you it's a cage, available at a moment's notice. When I have a headache, if I can't see you, I wouldn't mind making the Gu family cough up those tens of millions with interest. Then the door was shut, leaving me all alone, leaning against the wall. I stared at the mess on the floor and the small pile of ashes. I was at a loss for words, and even tears wouldn't come. The 3rd floor was Jiang Yuan's forbidden zone. The stairs leading up were covered in a dark gray shag carpet. The entire moving process was eerily silent. No noisy commands were being shouted, no thuds of heavy objects being set down. The servants moved like specially trained mime artists, clutching my pitifully small bundle of belongings. Their movements were so gentle, as if they were carrying fragile bubbles that would shatter at the slightest touch. The moment I stepped onto the 3rd floor corridor, following at the very end of the line, a suffocating vacuum-like silence washed over me. This place was like a giant soundproof box, completely cut off from the hustle and bustle of the outside world, or perhaps a cage, specially built to imprison some kind of monster. The old butler stopped before a heavy mahogany door. Mr. Gu, this is your room. He pushed the door open. The room was spacious. The decor is incredibly lavish, but the color palette was still a cold, stark gray and white. But what caught my attention the most was, to the left of this room is a solid, thick wall, and on the other side of that wall is Jiang Wanning's master bedroom. The butler seemed to see right through me. Those cloudy eyes held a meaningful warning. The young lady is right next door. Although this wall has been treated with top-of-the-line soundproofing, but the young lady's hearing is several times more sensitive than that of a normal person. So she turned and took a pair of white cotton slippers from the tray in the servant's hands, placed them by my feet. The butler straightened up. His voice was barely a whisper, as if he were reading from a royal decree. These are specially made soft-soled shoes. You must wear them whenever you're on the 3rd floor. Mr. Gu, you must remember the rules for survival on the 3rd floor. The sound of footsteps, sound of a door closing, the sound of objects being picked up or put down, even the sound of you swallowing water. He raised 2 bony fingers and held up a number that was just hopeless. Everything must be kept below 20 decibels. I stared at those shoes. My throat just tightened up. A chill crept up from the soles of my feet. And what if I accidentally go over? The butler stared at me, his face devoid of any expression.
His eyes were murky, shifted slightly, and uttered a single chilling sentence. The last servant who made a sound by accident was carried out, and no one ever saw him again. Mr. Gu is the young lady's medicine. The young lady might spare your life, but you'll likely not escape some physical pain. With that, the butler waved his hand. The servants retreated as swiftly as shadows. Even the sound of the closing door was kept to an absolute minimum. I was all alone in the room, a silence as deep as death, and instantly, it swallows me whole. I take a deep breath. I put on those soft-soled shoes. My feet sink into the carpet. Just as I thought, not a single sound. I walked over to the window. I wanted to pull back the heavy curtains, just to get some air. My hand had just brushed against the fabric, and my body froze again. Are you just going to be another one of those guys who ends up dead? I can't risk it. Then I slowly crouched down. I opened my own worn-out suitcase. There were no designer clothes inside, just a few changes of clothes, and some well-thumbed ancient books on traditional Chinese medicine, and a medicine mortar and pestle set made of green jade. This was left to me by my grandfather. The jade is warm and smooth, and the mortar has a satisfying heavy weight to it. Holding it in my hand, it has a comforting weight to it. I take out the medicine jar. I hold it gently in my arms. This is my only weapon, and the only thing that keeps me alive. The sleeping dragon next door could awaken at any moment. I must always be ready to use my incense and trade my medicine for a sliver of hope in this suffocating world. Since I'm here, I might as well make the best of it. I lower my gaze. Fingertips caress the cool patch of medicine. A glint of resilience, at odds with her fragile appearance, flash in her eyes. As long as he doesn't kill me, I can find a way to tame her. Lunchtime. Jiang Yuan's dining room was ridiculously huge. Everything was extravagantly luxurious. But sitting at the table, all I could feel was that this place was like an execution ground. Jiang Wanning requires someone to be with her whenever she eats, but she didn't say a word. And she wouldn't even look at me. There were 2 meters of space between us. I could even clearly feel the heavy, oppressive atmosphere radiating from her. The entire meal was eaten in dead silence. A row of servants stood around us. Every single one of them had their heads bowed. I didn't even dare to breathe too heavily. And holding a pair of silver chopsticks in my hand, every grain of rice is added with extreme caution, terrified that the chopsticks might clink against the porcelain bowl and make a sound. The food was tasteless, like I was just chewing on wax. I just hoped this suffocating lunch would be over soon. But then Jiang Wanning suddenly spoke up. Her voice was a grating, impatient noise. A young maid standing at the side hurried forward to see what was going on. "He's a new one." He nervously held a crystal water pitcher as she approached Jiang Wanning. Her hands were already trembling uncontrollably. I watched the maid, who was shaking like a leaf. My heart was in my throat. Of course, just what I was afraid of would happen. Just as the spout of the teapot drew near the rim of the cup, the maid's hand jerked violently. The rim of the lid clinked against the incredibly thin crystal cup. The sound was as sharp as a blade. It sliced through the dead silence in an instant. For a second, I felt the very air around me freeze solid. The maid in particular was scared out of her wits. Trembling, she tried to drop to her knees and beg for mercy. "Miss," Jiang Wanning, who had been cutting her steak. Her movements came to an abrupt halt. I could only watch as the hand holding the steak knife. His knuckles turned white. Palpable, violent aura erupted from him. To a normal person, it would be nothing more than a crisp, clear sound. But for Jiang Wanning, who suffers from hyperacusis, it felt as if someone were viciously stabbing her eardrums with countless steel needles, traveling down the auditory nerve and piercing deep into the brain, a pain that pierced right through to the bone. Jiang Wanning didn't look up. With icy indifference, he waved his hand. The next second, 2 ghost-like bodyguards in black instantly moved forward. Their movements were practiced in a way that was terrifying to behold. One of them swiftly moved in from behind, twisting the maid's arms back, while the other one clamped a black cloth tightly over her mouth. Because they knew if they let her scream out of fear, the consequences would be far worse than just being dragged away. The maid's eyes widened in shock. Tears welled up in her eyes. Her eyes were filled with despair and a silent plea for help. She looked at me, but there was nothing I could do. All I could do was sit there, frozen in my chair. I watched as that living, breathing person was dragged out of the dining room without a sound. In less than 10 seconds, silence fell over the dining room once more. All I felt was a chill, shot straight up my spine to the top of my head. My hands and feet turned to ice. I glanced down at the silver chopsticks in my hand. My fingers started shaking violently, out of my control. That was just the sound of the kettle clanking. What if it was my chopsticks clinking against the bowl while I was eating? Or what if I make a sound while swallowing my soup? Is that the fate of being dragged away? My tomorrow. A cold voice suddenly cut through the silence. "Why did you stop eating?" I jolted in surprise. I looked up right into Jiang Wanning's bottomless eyes. He was holding a napkin, leisurely wiping his fingers. My mouth opened, but no words came out. His voice trembled. Was I scared? Jiang Wanning casually tossed her napkin aside.
Leaning back in her chair, her gaze swept across my deathly pale face. The corners of her mouth curled into a cruel smirk. Gu Yeming, the only reason I'm keeping you around is because you're useful. But if you start making noise like all the other useless trash. He didn't finish his sentence, but the icy glint in her eyes said it all. I gripped the chopsticks in my hand, my knuckles turning white, my fingernails dug into my palm. Using that small amount of pain to force myself to calm down. I can't falter. I can't make a single mistake. After the maid was dragged away, the air in the dining room felt as if it had been sucked dry. Jiang Wanning didn't feel any sense of relief from punishing the one who started it all. On the contrary, that sharp, clear sound of impact from a moment ago. Like a nail exploding in his brain. The aftershocks were still reverberating. His auditory nerves were still throbbing. Every single nerve ending was screaming in agony. It felt as if a million electric drills were boring into his temples all at once. Jiang Wanning's gaze shot towards me like a sharp blade as I sat across from her. At that moment, I was still clutching that pair of silver chopsticks in my hand. My body was still frozen stiff from the shock of what just happened. The tips of the chopsticks hovered in mid-air, but I couldn't bring myself to let them fall. Seeing me trembling like this, but the turmoil in Jiang Wanning's heart was far greater. What are you still doing with those chopsticks? You want to make some noise too, or I'll have my bodyguards drag you out. This was pure, misplaced anger. I flinched, my shoulders tensing up. The chopsticks in my hand nearly clattered onto the table, driven by a desperate will to survive. I didn't, Miss Jiang. I'll be very quiet. I won't disturb you. As soon as the words left my mouth, I was bracing myself for her to fly into a rage and yell at me. The anticipated fury never came. An eerie silence suddenly fell over the entire dining room. Jiang Wanning's fingers, which had been massaging her temples, came to an abrupt and unexpected halt. Those phoenix eyes, usually filled with fury and gloom, but now a rare flicker of conflict appeared in them. The very instant my voice reached his ears, he thought it would be like everyone else. It was as if nails were scraping across a chalkboard, making him sick to his stomach. But instead, the sound slipped lightly into her eardrum. Instead of hurting her taut auditory nerves, instead it brought a tingling, prickly sort of itch. It was like a pair of gentle hands, gently smoothing out the explosive creases in her mind, the temples that had been throbbing with pain. And just like that, because of these few soft words of explanation, miraculously eased. Jiang Wanning. Suddenly, the look in her eyes changed. Her cold, clear eyes locked onto me unblinking. But the look in her eyes wasn't the usual disgust one reserves for trash. Instead, it was a dark, probing gaze, as if she had discovered a new continent. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but there was no sound. I slowly peeked open one eye, only to find myself staring right into Jiang Wanning's unwavering eyes. My heart skipped a beat in fright. I thought I must have spoken too loudly. Flustered, I tried to apologize. I'm sorry. Shut up. I was promoted on the spot. Keep your mouth shut. Jiang Wanning leaned back in her chair. Her slender fingers tapped lightly on the tabletop. I had a bad feeling about this, but I didn't dare to disobey. I had no choice but to put down my chopstick and move to his side. I kept my head down. I didn't even dare to breathe. Jiang Wanning turned to her side. Her eyes narrowed, her gaze searching my face. Say that again? I was floored. In that instant, my mind went completely blank. I can't even begin to follow this psycho's train of thought. What did I just say? Completely tense and bewildered, my eyes went wide. The word was short and gentle. It was utterly clueless and goofy. To Jiang Wanning's ears, but it was like a piece of soft candy, flicking against her eardrum. The deep frown that had been etched between his brows finally smoothed away, and the fierce glint in his eyes vanished completely. The violent, bloody hue in her eyes finally faded away completely. So, it wasn't just my imagination. He is my cure. It wasn't just the smell of flesh and blood. Even his voice is a sedative, custom-made for me by the heavens. So stupid. But there wasn't a hint of genuine anger in her voice. Instead, it carried a lazy, almost seductive quality that made one's heart race. For some reason, her mood had inexplicably lifted. Sit down. Have dinner with me. Jiang Wanning picked up her knife and fork again. This time, her movements were graceful and composed. Gone was the previous ferocity. I stood frozen in place. Her face was a mess. The afternoon sun was a bit harsh on the eyes, through the slits in the study's heavy curtains, piercing through the gloom of the room like a golden blade. Jiang Wanning sat in a black leather office chair. A mountain of documents was piled high on her desk, but he couldn't read a single word, even though he had slept the night before. But the aftermath of her bipolar disorder still washed over his nerves like a relentless tide. The dense swarm of mosquitoes blurred into a chaotic scramble of ants before his eyes. The sight made his temples throb. That violent rage inside him was about to boil over again. If this were any other time, by now this pile of documents worth billions
had already been torn to shreds by him. But today he had a new discovery, or rather a new way to soothe her. Jiang Wanning picked up the intercom on her desk. Wake him up. He arrived in less than 2 minutes. The heavy study door was pushed open just a crack. Wearing those soft-soled shoes, I tiptoed in cautiously. Miss Jiang, you wanted to see me? I stopped about 3 meters away from the desk, with my hands clasped in front of me. I was ready to bolt at any second. Jiang Wanning lifted her eyelids and glanced at me, standing so far away. What's with the act? I'm going to eat you. He casually picked up a thick, all-English financial report from the table and slammed it down the corner of the table. It landed with a dull thud.
I had no choice but to inch my way over. Jiang Wanning gestured with her chin towards a spot by the table, signaling for him to sit.
And there, at some point, a small round stool had appeared. And it was even topped with a soft cushion. It looked completely out of place in this cold, imposing study. I obediently sat down. Jiang Wanning pointed at the financial report. Keep it brief. I froze for a second. I picked up the hefty document. I opened it to the first page. It was filled with dense, technical jargon and English words. It made my head spin instantly. You want me to read this? I studied traditional Chinese medicine. My English grades were decent, though. But all this Hui said is Shanye Bingo Tiaoquan Ho Jinrong Shuyu. To me, it's all just gibberish. Jiang Wanning leaned back in her chair. Close your eyes. She raises a hand to her forehead. What else? Should I be chanting sutras? Louder.
Don't sound like you haven't eaten. I didn't dare to argue. I took a deep breath. Clutching the documents, I began to speak, stumbling over my words. At first, my voice was still thick with nervousness and trembling. It even stumbled over obscure technical terms. Even my pronunciation was tinged with a hint of hesitant uncertainty. Normally, if she were hearing a subordinate give a report, stumbling over his words like that, Jiang Wanning would have had them thrown out long ago. But at this moment, as that gentle voice broke the dead silence of the study, miraculously, the deep frown that had been etched between her brows began to soften. Jiang Wanning leaned back against the spacious chair. Her entire body was more relaxed than it had ever been. She wasn't listening to the words. He had long since committed all that data to memory. He was listening to that voice. The sound was like a cool spring flowing gently through him. His parched eardrums transformed into the world's most perfect white noise. The sharp ringing in my head was gone, and that violent urge to destroy everything was soothed away as well. I don't know how much time had passed. My mouth was parched from reciting. Seeing the woman with her eyes closed and completely still, I thought she had fallen asleep. I tentatively stopped and called out softly, Miss Jiang? The sound had barely faded. Jiang Wanning's phoenix-like eyes, which had been closed, snapped open in an instant. There wasn't a trace of sleepiness in them, only the displeasure of being interrupted. Why did you stop? I am thirsty. Jiang Wanning stared at me for a second. Then she suddenly reached out and pushed the untouched glass of warm water from beside his hand in front of me. Drink it. Is this for me? Jiang Wanning raised an eyebrow. Her tone was dangerous and full of disdain. No, no, no. How would I dare? I quickly picked up the expensive crystal cup and started sipping it in little nibbles, just like a tiny hamster. Jiang Wanning watched my cheeks puff out as I drank. Her fingers tapped lightly against the armrest. A strange sense of joy washed over her. Seeing me put down the cup, Jiang Wanning closed her eyes again. Her red lips parted slightly. Now that you're finished, go ahead and read the overseas market expansion proposal. I stared at the massive stack of business plans, all written in English. I was on the verge of tears, but they just wouldn't come. I'd been reading English financial reports out loud for 2 hours straight. I felt like my throat was about to start smoking. Even though I had a glass of water in between, my vocal cords feel raw from overuse. I still couldn't help but feel the urge to cough. But I don't dare to cough. I was terrified that even a single cough would set off her sensitive nerves again. The story of time has been told, and he was still holding the folder. His voice was already tinged with a noticeable hoarseness and exhaustion. Jiang Wanning leaned back in her chair, listening to bedtime fairy tales for 2 hours. The sharp ringing in his head had indeed subsided quite a bit. Finally, she mercifully spoke. All right, let's take a break. As she spoke, she casually picked up a pen, ready to sign the document. It was like a death sentence had been commuted. I let out a long sigh of relief. But I didn't dare to leave. Just sitting here, waiting. This is pure agony. Plus, my mind starts to wander. My eyes wandered and landed on the cloth bag at my feet. Inside was my entire set of tools of the trade. Since her mood was relatively stable for now, I should probably get down to business. Summoning my courage, I carefully pulled a green jade mortar and a small pestle out of the cloth bag. Then, I pulled out a few small, sealed paper packets. Inside are some calming herbs I prepared earlier. This specially made storax incense works best when it's freshly ground. If I could just make the scent in this study a little stronger. Maybe then she won't lose her temper so easily.
I pour the herbs into the glass mortar. I gripped the mortar. I gave it a gentle, tentative shake. A dull, monotonous thud echoed through the quiet study. My heart suddenly seized. Her hand froze mid-motion. Instinctively, I held my breath. I looked up in terror at the woman behind the desk. Jiang Wanning's hand in the middle of signing a document, just as I thought. It stopped. The tip of the pen left a small smudge of ink on the paper. The air in the study seemed to freeze in an instant. My hand gripping the medicine pestle. A cold sweat broke out all over me. I'm already picturing the bodyguards rushing in, and the scene of them throwing me and my medicine jar out the door. I'm sorry. I'll put it away right now. I was about to straighten up. Jiang Wanning cut me off. What is that sound? He didn't look up. She just tilted her head slightly to the side. His brow furrowed slightly, as if he were trying to discern something. I gulped. Spit it out. Is it the medicine? I'm making a sedative incense. Jiang Wanning finally looked up. Her cool, distant eyes fell upon the green jade medicine box in my arms. Then she averted her gaze and lowered her head to look at the documents again. Continue. I froze for a second. Jiang Wanning clicked her tongue impatiently. Did I stutter? I said continue. How could I dare to ask again? I quickly tightened my grip on the pestle. Once again, I carefully poured it out. At first, my movements were still hesitant, afraid of using too much force. But as the pestle fell again and again, that dull, rhythmic sound began to echo through the study. Gradually, the herbs were ground into fine pieces, a delicate and fresh scent. The aroma of the herbs, slightly bitter at first, but with a sweet, lingering aftertaste. It slowly wafted through the air with my movements. Jiang Wanning felt her eyelids growing heavy. It was that natural, long-lost feeling of drowsiness, gently enveloping her like the tide. Before she knew it, sunlight from outside streamed in diagonally through the sheer curtains, casting dappled patterns of light and shadow across the carpet. Inside the study, a scene both bizarrely strange and yet perfectly harmonious was unfolding. The young lady from Beijing's elite circles, the one who held the power of life and death over a business empire worth hundreds of billions, was leaning back in her executive chair. The fountain pen in her hand had slipped from her grasp at some point. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing became long and deep. And not far from his feet, I was sitting on a small stool, cradling a green jade jar in my arms, like a diligent little rabbit pouring it out one careful drop at a time. The piece was so profound it felt almost surreal, until half an hour later, my hand is killing me, and secretly stopped for a moment and shake the ache out of my hand. The moment the sound stopped, the woman in the chair immediately let out a displeased grunt. Her brows furrowed instinctively. Don't stop, just a little longer. I looked at the woman who treated me like her personal white noise machine. I pouted, feeling a bit wronged. Resigned to my fate, I could only pick up the medicine mortar again. Right next to this contract worth hundreds of millions. I had to keep grinding away, playing the part of his little medicine boy. But it didn't take long for me to realize something was off. He spun the fountain pen between his fingers and slammed it down on the desk again. Not enough. It's still not enough. Jiang Wanning felt the beast inside her, the one called skin hunger, beginning to awaken. And while the sound in her ears was very soothing, the medicinal scent wafting through the air was also very soothing, but she still felt like something was missing. That sense of emptiness, gnawing in her veins like a swarm of ants, making his fingers itch. She was desperate to hold on to something, anything real. She lifted her head, and her gaze landed on me, huddled in the corner. I jumped. My hand, which was grinding herbs, froze mid-motion. I looked up, bewildered. What's wrong? Was I being too loud? Did I disturb you? Jiang Wanning tossed the pen aside. She leans back in her chair. Her eyes were fixed right on me. Too far. I can't hear a thing. I glanced at the 3 meters between us. Then I glanced around again at the silence so profound you could hear a pin drop. She can't hear me in the study. This is a room where you can hear the maid next door just barely grazing a cup when she pours water. Jiang Wanning with her godlike hearing. I tried to reason with her. Miss Jiang, move over here and sit down. But Jiang Wanning wasn't listening to a word I said. The spot was right next to her executive chair. I was screaming no in my head a million times. That's a high-risk zone. Like being the king's favorite, you're always one wrong move away from disaster. But as Jiang Wanning's gaze turned cold and bore down on me, I had no choice but to cave. I held the green jade censer, holding a small, round knife. I inched over like a snail. Jiang Wanning seemed satisfied with the distance. The crease between her brows eased a little. Keep going, right here. So I had no choice but to sit back down. I had no choice but to brace myself and keep grinding the herbs. I just wanted to shrink into myself, and to be as inconspicuous as possible. Jiang Wanning picked up the documents again, but this time he didn't spin his pen again. His idle left hand fell to his side naturally. I was intently focused on the ripples. Suddenly, I felt a tingle run down my scalp. A cool hand landed on the top of my head without warning. I was about to cry out, Wanning, without even looking up. Her gaze remained fixed on the contract in her hands. Don't move. You have a white hair. Before I could even argue back, and that hand was already sliding down from the top of my head, weaving through my jet black hair. My entire body was stiff as a board, and I could tell that hand had no intention of stopping.
Tired of playing with my hair. Then her cool fingertips grazed the shell of my ear, a barely there touch. My ears are extremely sensitive. In an instant, they burned bright red as if on fire. Jiang Wanning. Finally, he tore his eyes away from the documents for a second. Why are your ears so red? He only escalated his actions. The pad of his index finger gently pinched my burning earlobe, meeting it with just the right amount of pressure. I couldn't help but try to pull away, but he held me down with a bit more force. Just focus on your work. The old doctor's apprentice was thrown into disarray. I felt so wrong my eyes started to water. Miss Jiang bites down, but Jiang Wanning remained completely unfazed. Humph. Bear with it. Well, what can I say? You're my cure. The atmosphere in the study was strange and quiet. Jiang Wanning seemed to relish this peculiar pleasure of working while toying with her pet. With her left hand, she flipped through the documents, but her right hand never left the back of my neck and my earlobe. It was as if she were fiddling with a convenient little stress toy. I was kneeling on the carpet. My legs have gone numb. Just then, the tablet on the table suddenly started to vibrate, shattering the tranquility. It was an encrypted, international video conference. Jiang Wanning glanced at the note on the screen. She showed no intention of asking me to leave. He just lazily pulled back his mischievous hand and pressed the answer button. But he didn't let me get up. Instead, he gently nudged my calf with the tip of his foot, signaling that I wasn't to stop. My only choice was to try and hide in the camera's blind spot. The video connected, and instantly several grim faces appeared on the other side of the screen. President Jiang and Wanning. Even through the screen, I could practically feel the tension radiating from their side of the screen. I heard that during the last video conference, because someone's background noise was a power drill from construction work, and Wanning just slammed her tablet down, and even had the person in charge fired. So this time, everyone was in a soundproof room in absolute silence, not even daring to breathe. Jiang Wanning leaned back in her chair. Her expression was cold. Let's get down to business. The meeting begins. The executives began to take turns presenting the quarterly financial reports. Every single figure was reported with extreme caution. The study was quiet. The only sounds were the occasional flipping of a page and the faint, muffled grinding of medicine from beneath the table. This was because the audio had been processed with special microphone noise cancellation. Plus, Jiang Wanning was deliberately blocking the source of the sound. The person on the other end of the video didn't hear this strange background noise. Until I just couldn't take that position anymore. It was so tiring. I tried to sneakily shift my position, but the moment I moved, my arm accidentally bumped into the leg of the table. The medicine pestle in his hand slipped out of his grasp in an instant. A hard nephrite pestle slammed heavily against the rim of the mortar before rolling onto the floor. It slammed against the base of the marble table leg. This series of crisp, sharp clatters was heard on the other end of the video call. It was like a bolt from the blue. The video conference fell into a dead silence. The executives on the other side of the screen were scared pale. The report came to an abrupt halt. Everyone held their breath. Their eyes were glued to the screen, fixed on Jiang Wanning, awaiting the impending thunderous fury. Inside the study, I was frozen in fear. I frantically scrambled to pick up the medicine box. I looked up, staring in terror at the woman above me. I'm sorry. Just as I expected, the warmth in Jiang Wanning's eyes vanished, replaced by a chilling cold. Her gaze shifted away from the screen and slowly lowered her head to look at me. Just when the person on the other side of the video thought she was about to explode, just when I thought I was about to be thrown out to the wolves, the woman who had always been intolerant of the slightest noise merely furrowed her brow. Then, to my surprise, he reached his hand under the table, in this absolute blind spot of the camera, and gently caught my hand. The pads of my fingers, icy cold from the shock, and gently rubbed my slightly reddened knuckles. Gently now. Does it hurt? On the other side of the video, everyone was completely petrified. The executives looked at each other, completely at a loss, suspecting he was hearing things. A few playboys from the Beijing social circle, who knew a thing or two about the ways of the world. Their expressions instantly became a sight to behold, and even a hint of unspeakable shock. The vice president stammered as he began to speak. President Jiang, should we step aside for a moment? Jiang Wanning looked up. His gaze returned to the screen. In that instant, the tenderness on his face vanished without a trace. His face reverted to that same cold, dead, frosty mask. What's there to avoid? Meanwhile, his other hand was under the table, casually toying with my fingers, while the other tapped on the desk. Resume your report on the data from earlier. One more decimal point out of place.
Go to HR and get your resignation letter. The meeting will continue. But everyone else was completely losing their minds. Everyone was giving their reports, trembling with fear,
while sneakily glancing at the blind spot below the screen out of the corner of their eyes. Meanwhile, under the table, my face was completely flushed, because Jiang Wanning was still holding my hand, and she wasn't letting go. And there she was, listening to a report on a multi-billion-dollar project with a completely blank expression on her face, while under the table she was viciously cracking my knuckles, one by one. As evening fell, it was time for the banquet. The atmosphere in the dining room was still quiet, but it was clearly a lot less tense than that drawn-out ordeal at noon. The servants remained standing with their heads bowed, not daring to even breathe, but their eyes betrayed a flicker of undisguised astonishment, because Jiang Wanning seemed to be in a rather good mood tonight. She had changed into a dusty pink loungewear set, sipping her soup at a leisurely pace. The usual cold, distant aura that always lingered between her brows, as if it had been temporarily washed away by the 2 hours of medicine pounding sounds from the afternoon. I was sitting across from him. I was on pins and needles. I don't know what happened to the video conference after that. All I remember is when the vice president hung up the video call. Her expression was as if she was crying, and also like he was laughing. Cool, detached voice. Suddenly, the silence was broken. Eat up. I was just holding a bowl of cooked rice. Hearing this, I shot my head up. I saw Jiang Wanning pick up the serving chopsticks and with practiced ease picked up a glistening piece of sweet and sour pork rib and placed it right into my pristine white-bone china bowl. For a moment, it felt as if the very air around us had frozen solid. The old butler standing nearby's eyelid twitched violently. Jiang Wanning put down the serving chopsticks. Her gaze landed on my stunned face. Her brow arched slightly. "What are you staring at? Don't you want to eat?" Snapping out of it, I looked down at the rib in my bowl. With mixed feelings, it was like looking at a piece of meat on a condemned man's plate. "Thank you, Miss Jiang." With that, I picked up a rib and took a bite. The sweet and sour flavor was just right. The meat is so tender it just falls apart. Jiang Wanning looked at me, clearly in a good mood. "Since you enjoy making medicine so much, from now on, you'll be the one to make all of my calming incense." I've just caught my breath. Hearing this, I nodded instinctively. Good incense requires a dedicated workshop. It has a grinder inside. That's pretty convenient. No machines. Things made by machines have no soul. He leaned back. Her fingers gently caressed the jade Buddhist beads on her wrist. And then she said something incredibly domineering and unreasonable. "I want you to make it with your own hands. Use that celadon jar to grind it down, little by little." My eyes went wide. I stared at him in disbelief. Miss Jiang goes through a massive amount of calming incense every month. If it all has to be ground by hand, what about my hands? Do I even get to keep them? But Miss Jiang, that method is very inefficient, and it's exhausting. The smile in Jiang Wanning's eyes faded slightly. Her voice carried a dangerous, oppressive weight. "What? You thought you were here to live a life of luxury? Gu Yannying, don't forget your place. You're here to pay a debt." In an instant, it was like all the air had been let out of me, and I just deflated. "I understand." I lowered my head and poked at the rice in my bowl, but what I didn't know was, Jiang Wanning didn't care about efficiency at all, nor did she care about any soul. She had just become obsessed with that sound. She became obsessed with me, sitting by his side because of the way he tirelessly ground herbs for her. I thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't until nightfall that I discovered this lunatic's peculiar habits went far beyond that. PM. I had just finished my shower and was just about to get some sleep in my own room. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. "Mr. Gu, the young lady. The young lady requests your presence." With a heart full of trepidation, carrying the tools of my trade, pushing open the door to the master bedroom next door was that celadon medicine jar. Jiang Wanning was already lying in bed. She was leaning against the headboard wearing a black slip dress with a book in her hand. He patted a spot on the carpet by the bed. "Come here." I walked over, holding the medicine jar. I watched him warily. "Miss Jiang, it's so late. Do I still have to read?" Jiang Wanning placed the book on the nightstand. Then she pointed at the jar in my arms. "No more reading." I glanced at the wall clock. 10:30. "Aren't you supposed to be going to sleep now?" Jiang Wanning slipped under the covers. She adjusted into a comfortable position. "Lie still and fold your hands." Resting them on her stomach, close your eyes. She spoke as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Just so I can go to sleep. I want to sleep to that sound. It helps me sleep." I stood by the bed holding a medicine jar. I was a complete mess, treating the sound of a blade as a lullaby. What kind of sick, twisted kink is this? Jiang Wanning didn't hear a thing. She opened her eyes, displeased. "What are you spacing out for? And don't stop until I say so." "Don't stop." I took a deep breath. Resigned, I sat down on the carpet by the bed.
I rested the medicine jar on my knees.
A dull, monotonous thudding sound began to echo in the silent bedroom. The aroma of the herbs slowly began to fill the air. This mingled with the cold, crisp scent that was already on Jiang Waning's bed, mingling into a peculiar scent. Jiang Waning's eyes were closed. Her breathing gradually steadied. For me, this is tedious, back-breaking work. With every pore, the more my wrist ached, but to Jiang Waning's senses, to her, it was the ultimate pleasure. Half an hour went by, my hands about to break, and my eyelids were getting heavy too. I stole a glance at the person on the bed. Jiang Waning's breathing was long and steady. Looks like she's sound asleep. That face, so cold and sharp during the day, looked especially peaceful and harmless under the dim yellow light. Even her eyelashes are enviably long, I muttered to myself. Looks like she's asleep. My movements gradually came to a halt. I thought I'd sneak back to bed. However, the sound had barely faded for 3 seconds. The woman who had been sound asleep in the bed suddenly moved one of her hands and grabbed my wrist, which was hanging by the bedside. I was so startled I almost screamed, trying to slack off. But Jiang Waning didn't open her eyes. Her voice was thick with sleep, but her grip was still possessively tight. He didn't let go. Instead, she took the opportunity to pull my wrist down to her pillow. She nuzzled her cheek against the back of my hand. Don't stop. Then she pulled the covers up a bit more. He pinned one of my hands under the covers as well, as if it were a chain to keep his toy from escaping. I was forced to lie prone on the edge of the bed. One of my hands was pinned down by her, while my other hand struggled to hold the medicine mortar. Looking at the woman who treated me like a human sleep aid and a hand warmer, I was on the verge of tears, but none would come. The pitiful sound of medicine being pounded echoed once more in the dead of night on the 3rd floor of the Jiang residence, and with a helpless sigh from me. This went on until the dead of night. After several days of being forced to study with her and pounding medicine late into the night brought a strange sense of harmony to the 3rd floor of the Jiang residence. The servants were surprised to discover the frequency of the moody young lady's tantrums has dropped dramatically lately, and me? I was the one who made all of this happen, and my treatment in the Jiang household visibly improved as well. The kitchen would even prepare my favorite Jiangan-style desserts just for me. The servants would bow respectfully when they saw me. Even Jiang Wanning herself, on the rare occasion she was in a good mood, she even let me read for leisure in the study, instead of just chanting about treasure like a broken record. This illusion of peaceful, tranquil days, and allowed my frayed nerves to slowly unwind. I even started to feel a sliver of unwarranted hope. The study in the afternoon. Jiang Wanning was sitting behind her spacious desk, handling business matters. I was sitting on a sofa off to the side, cradling a cup of freshly brewed hot tea in my hands, but my gaze kept drifting back to her. Lately, Jiang Wanning's been tolerating me to an unbelievable degree. Even if I walked a little too heavily, or made a bit too much noise while turning a page, she would just give me a faint glance. He never lost his temper. This led to a dangerous question forming in my mind. What are his limits when it comes to me? Is it because my voice and scent are truly irreplaceable? Or is it that he, just like he did that night when he burned the IOU, that he's actually starting to see me as a person, just a little bit? If it's the former, then I'm just a tool. But if it's the latter, then perhaps I have some leverage to bargain with. I lowered my eyes. I looked down at the heavy glass in my hand. Let's give it a shot. It's a gamble. I stood up. I carried the cup over to her desk. Miss Jiang, your water's gone cold. Let me get you a fresh one. Jiang Wanning didn't look up. She just kept signing her name, while casually humming in acknowledgement. I picked up the cup by his hand. I walked over to the water dispenser nearby and filled it with water. The sound of the water is so clear. Everything was as it should be. After filling the cup, I walked back to the table. In the moment I set the cup down, my fingers loosened, just a fraction, the heavy bottom of the glass, and slammed heavily onto the hard black walnut tabletop. Even the water inside the cup splashed out. A few drops landed on the document Jiang Wanning had just signed. It was as if time had frozen in that very second. My heart instantly leaped into my throat. My fingers were clutching the corner of my clothes. I held my breath, observing the woman's reaction. 1 second, 2 seconds. Jiang Wanning slowly raised her head. In those cool phoenix-like eyes, there was none of the fury I had anticipated, nor was there the indulgence I had hoped for. There was only a piercing, ice-cold clarity. That look was just piercing. A chill ran down my spine. A fear like being locked in the sights of a wild beast instantly crawled all over my body. Jiang Wanning put down her brush and leaned back, leaning back in her chair. My hand slipped. I gulped. I had to bite the bullet and play along. I'm sorry. I didn't hold it steady. Jiang Wanning let out a soft chuckle, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Instead, her eyes held a chilling coldness that sent a shiver down my spine. Is that it? Gu Yenlin, do you think I've been too good to you lately? My body went rigid. Instinctively, I wanted to back away. Miss Jiang, I didn't mean to come over. Her two short words cut through my feeble explanation. I don't want to go over. The elephant has taken root. Jiang Wanning narrowed her eyes. Her patience had run out. Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed my wrist. I stumbled forward, losing my balance. The next second, the world spun, and just like that, I was pulled right into their arms. In that instant, the distance between us vanished. Miss Xiao, what are you doing? Jiang Wanning raised her other hand. Her index finger gently pressed against my lips. Shh. She lowered her head. The tip of her nose was almost touching mine. Gu Yahan, cut out your little schemes. What are you trying to test? Testing to see if I'd actually lay a hand on you? Or are you testing to see if you can turn this cage upside down? I didn't. You let go of that cup on purpose just now. You wanted to see if it'd do something to you over a little noise. The shame and fear of being exposed, and made my body tremble uncontrollably. A glint of violent pleasure flashed in Jiang Wanning's eyes. He suddenly leaned in close to my ear. Gu Yahan, you have to remember that I'm the one who spoils you, letting you roam freely in this forbidden place. It's because you're a good girl. You're my little demon. But that doesn't mean you can get carried away and walk all over me. This is the first time, and it will be the last. Don't let it happen again. Jiang Wanning's tone turned ice cold. Her voice was laced with a bone-chilling cold. If I ever catch you deliberately making noise to provoke me again. In the Jiang family's basement, there's a room that's completely soundproof. There is no light in there, no sound. Even the very air is dead, and I'll lock you inside. Even if you scream your lungs out in there, and not a single sound will get out. And then, you'll never make a sound again for the rest of your life. My face went deathly pale in an instant. Seeing my eyes well up with tears, to my surprise, the ferocity in Jiang Wanning's eyes actually softened a little. As long as you behave yourself, be my medicine. A place like that will never be for you. Do you understand? I understand. A satisfied smile tugged at the corner of Jiang Wanning's lips. He lowered his head and pressed a feather-like kiss on my damp eyes. Good boy, since you understand. Now, wipe the table clean. And this, he said, pointing to the document that had been ruined by the water. Read it again. I scrambled to wipe the water stains off the table. My hands were still shaking uncontrollably. At that moment, I came to my senses completely. So much for a peaceful life. All that talk of a gentle, affectionate dog was just a lie. A vicious dog will always be a vicious dog. Even if it wags its tail every now and then, it can never change its true nature to devour people. That was a warning. 3 days after the incident, I could clearly feel the shift in the atmosphere around Jiang Yuan. Or to be more precise, the way everyone treated me had completely changed. Before, the servants would look at me with pity in their eyes. But now that look had turned to one of reverence, and even a hint of fawning. Mr. Gu, this is some osmanthus candy freshly made in the kitchen. Lotus root. The young lady mentioned you have a sweet tooth. I made them with fresh osmanthus flowers, specially shipped from the Jiangnan region. Mr. Gu, your herbs have finished drying. Would you like me to put them in a jar for you? I walked down the stairs. The servants I passed along the way all bowed respectfully. They practically wanted to put me on a pedestal. And there's a simple reason for that. Over the past few days, everyone had figured out one ironclad rule for survival. As long as I'm around that moody, living hellion, it's like facing a tiger with its fangs pulled. My chances of survival have skyrocketed. And the only one who can put out Jiang Yuan's fires, and the only thing keeping the entire family alive, am. I was sitting on the living room sofa, flipping through a medical book. The old butler hurried over, a look of anxiety on his face. Mr. Gu, could you please go to the study? Shang Xu and I watched him warily. What's wrong? The butler wiped his sweat. He glanced upstairs, still shaken. The head of the branch in the south is here. He really messed up, resulting in a 300 million bad debt. The young lady is absolutely furious. She's already smashed a whole tea set just now. The person in charge is kneeling in there. They'll probably be carried out any minute now. I purse my lips. That's Miss Jiang's business. It's probably not appropriate for me to go in, is it? He's usually so stern and unsmiling. The butler, who always has such a stern face, but now he was bowing deeply to me. Mr. Gu, I'm begging you. Inside, besides the person in charge and several other top executives from the group, if the young lady actually gets physical, things could get out of hand. Right now, you're the only one who can go in, even if it's just to bring her a cup of tea. That should cool the young lady's temper by half. I looked at the butler's graying hair and the faint sound of angry shouting from upstairs. In the end, all I could do was let out a helpless sigh. I understand. I got up and went to the kitchen to get a cup of freshly brewed tea. The study door wasn't quite closed. I had just reached the doorway when I heard a violent sneer from within. 3.
You might as well throw it in the sea. At least it'll make a nice sound. Go gamble it away. You must have a death wish. The sharp sound of shattering porcelain echoed. The middle-aged man kneeling on the ground was shaking like a leaf. His forehead hit the shards of porcelain. Blood streamed down his face, but he couldn't even get the words out to beg for his life. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The executives who were standing there didn't even dare to breathe. And just in the midst of this suffocating silence, 2 very soft knocks were heard. Everyone flinched. However, the woman sitting in the executive chair, Jiang Wanning, radiating a violent aura, heard the sound and the corner of her brow twitched ever so slightly. Her cold gaze swept towards the door. I walked in carrying a tray and walked straight to the desk and gently placed the cup of ginseng tea beside her hand. Miss Jiang, please have some tea and calm down. Everyone held their breath, anticipating the young lady's inevitable outburst. But then, a miracle happened. Jiang Wanning's previously tense jawline, as she caught the familiar scent on me, visibly relaxed. Throw him out, follow the rules, break one of his hands, take him to the police. The man on the ground felt as if he'd been granted a royal pardon, even if it meant losing a hand, but at least they'd be alive. Thank you, President Jiang. Thank you, President Jiang. The executives also retreated like a receding tide. Before they left, they all couldn't help but steal a glance at me.
Their eyes were filled with gratitude, as if I were some kind of saint who had saved them from a living hell. The study soon returned to its quiet state. Jiang Wanning took a sip of her tea. He reached out and, as he often did, gently squeezed my fingers that were hanging by my side. The butler sent you. I thought you might be thirsty. Jiang Wanning let out a soft chuckle. She didn't call me out on my little trick. He set the teacup down. He stood up and smoothed his slightly disheveled hair. All right, stop standing there gawking. Go get changed. I'm going out. Jiang Wanning walked over to the dressing table. She picked up a pair of pearl earrings, but instead of putting them on herself, instead she looked at me through the mirror. Her cool gaze was fixed on me from behind. She turned around, her chin tilted up slightly, revealing the cool, pale line of her neck. Her posture was regal, as if she expected nothing less.
What are you spacing out for? Come put this earring on me.
All I could see was a slight tremor, but seeing the brook, no argument look in her eyes, I had no choice but to walk over. We were so close. I could feel the warmth of her breath. And Jiang Wanning, she looked up at me. Her gaze landed unabashedly on my focused eyes and brows. Her hand rested lightly on my waist. There we go. I put on my earring. I was just about to take a step back to create some distance, but Jiang Wanning grabbed my waist. She wouldn't let me move. Hey, go upstairs and get a coat. With that, she let go of me. She turned and grabbed her coat from the rack and dropped a bombshell that made my heart stop. Come with me. Where to? I'm taking you to an event. Jiang Wanning stood in the play of light and shadow at the entrance, twirling the Buddhist prayer beads on her wrist. So, you've been hiding all this time. If those people outside still can't take a hint, but the threshold of this Jiang garden is about to be worn down by all the visitors. 8 p.m. The night was as dark as ink. Once the Lanting car came to a stop, the bodyguard respectfully opened the car door. Jiang Wanning stepped out of the car. But he didn't leave right away. Instead, he stood by the car door, leaning slightly to the side. Then, I climbed out of the car. Jiang Wanning noticed me stiffen and hunch my shoulders. Are you cold? No, I'm not. I'm just a little scared. The atmosphere here is so suffocating. Black-clad bodyguards were everywhere. Even the attendants at the door stood with their heads bowed, not daring to look up. The air was thick with an indescribable, austere atmosphere. What are you afraid of? I'm here. No one in the capital dares to touch me. Finish what you were saying. She took my arm and headed straight for the main gate. We passed through a winding corridor. The surroundings grew more and more secluded. Several waiters in traditional Tang suits saw Jiang Wanning and immediately bowed at a perfect 90-degree angle. I'd never seen anything like it. I'm already socially awkward to begin with. Plus the oppressive atmosphere of this high society scene, a world I'd never set foot in before, instinctively making me feel uneasy. Jiang Wanning, by my side, became my only anchor. Jiang Wanning turned to the side and looked at me with a half smile. Give me your hand, she said. She held out her left hand, the one with the Buddhist prayer beads. I froze for a second, before I could even react. Losing patience, he immediately flipped his hand over and clasped mine. And just like that, she clasped my warm, large hand in hers. My heart was pounding. Miss Jiang. Jiang Wanning's eyes were fixed straight ahead. She grabbed my hand and pulled me along. Stay close. There are a lot of mazes in here. If you get lost, I'm not looking for you. Jiang Wanning's fingers clamped down on my wrist like a vice, the force of her grip. This isn't about being afraid. I'll get lost. She was clearly afraid it'd run away. The most exclusive private room in the innermost part of the Orchid Pavilion. The heavy carved wooden door was shut tight. Faint laughter and chatter could be heard from within.
The bodyguard at the door saw Jiang Wanning, immediately pushed the door open with a respectful bow. Miss Jiang has arrived. With that announcement, the once noisy private room fell silent in an instant. Holding Jiang Wanning's hand, I stepped across the high threshold in a single stride. The private room was hazy with smoke. Seated inside were 7 or 8 young women, all dressed to the nines. When all eyes snapped toward us in unison, everyone's expression froze.
The one who's always kept men at arm's length, Jiang Wanning, the woman rumored to have severe misophobia and androphobia, was actually holding hands with a man. One was seated at the head of the table. The woman in the qipao was the first to react. Her eyes flickered teasingly over our clasped hands. Well, speak of the devil, Wanning, and where did this handsome young man come from? How come I've never seen him with Jiang Wanning before? Ignoring the stares from everyone around, he led me to the very center of the sofa. He pressed his hand on my shoulder and had me sit down beside him. Only then did he leisurely sit down. So, that's the woman in the qipao who's supposed to cure headaches. He leaned in and lowered his voice. He looks pretty young. He's probably still a student. I was being looked at as if I were a piece of merchandise. The way they looked at me made my skin crawl. I instinctively shrank back behind Jiang Wanning. This movement caused me to bump right into Jiang Wanning's arm. Jiang Wanning glanced up, shooting a cold look at the woman in the qipao.
What are you looking at? You got a problem with your eyes. The one in the qipao flinched. She awkwardly rubbed her nose. All right, I'm not looking. All right, I'm not looking, okay? It's all blurry, like I'm staring at your eyeball. Jiang Wanning ignored him. She just turned her head to look at him, cowering behind her, me quivering like a little quail. He reached out with his fingertips, brushing, whether on purpose or not, against my burning earlobe. Sit still. Don't run off. Don't look around. If you get snatched away by those she-wolves, it'll get angry, you know. The lights in the private room were dim. The air was thick with a mingled sense of expensive perfume and alcohol, causing Jiang Wanning to frown almost imperceptibly.
He had always loathed these kinds of stuffy, chaotic environments. If it weren't for the development rights to that plot of land in the south, he wouldn't normally set foot in a place like this for anything. I sat quietly by his side, trying to make myself as small as possible. Sitting across from me was the key figure for this partnership, Su Manjing, the president of the Su Group. After a few drinks, his eyes started to dart around restlessly. Wanning, I heard you've been at Jiang Yuan recently, focusing on your well-being. You've barely even been to the office, cultivating my character. Far from it. I'm just recuperating from an illness. Su Manjing gave a faint smile. My gaze went past Jiang Wanning, getting better by shamelessly clinging to me. I think it's more about nursing a handsome guy, isn't it? I felt that gaze falter as if it had been squeezed into a corner. I instinctively shifted a bit closer to Jiang Wanning. This movement. My arm brushed lightly against Jiang Wanning's. Jiang Wanning's movements faltered for a moment, but she didn't push me away. Instead, she took the opportunity to raise her arm and rested it loosely on the back of the sofa behind me. It was a gesture that was both possessive and protective. Jiang Wanning lifted her eyelids. Her voice turned a few degrees colder. President Su, let's talk business. Su Manjing was clearly wasted, failing to catch the warning in Jiang Wanning's tone. He staggered to his feet, wineglass in hand. He grabs a clean wineglass and poured a full glass of red wine. We have business to discuss, but should we be drinking too? And now this young man, Su Man, is actually holding a wineglass, walked around the coffee table, and placed it right in front of me. Our first meeting. Here's a toast from your big sister. Judging by your outfit, you're still in school, aren't you? College boys these days are just so green.
It must get pretty lonely, following a busy woman like Miss Jiang. Come on, drink this. Consider this our first meeting. I stare at the red wine swaying in front of me. The pungent smell of alcohol filled my nose. My stomach churned. I don't drink. Besides, I'm allergic to alcohol. I tried to back away to refuse. I'm sorry. Su Manjing's expression turned cold, emboldened by the alcohol, and reached for my wrist. Hey, you're not going to play along. The guy Miss Jiang brought has quite the attitude. What's wrong with taking a sip? It's not like it's drugged. Just as that hand was about to touch, a slender, pale hand shot out of nowhere, steadily shielding. Jiang Wanning's hand blocked the wine cup with the back of it. He doesn't drink. Su Manjing was taken aback for a moment, and just like that, the alcohol hit him. This only pissed him off more.
Wanning, come on. This is no fun. We're all out to have a good time. We're just here to have a good time. You're just the lover of some high society princess from the capital. So high and mighty, huh? Can't even handle a single drink. The moment she said that, the air in the private room instantly froze. The expressions on the faces of the wealthy women around us, who had been watching the drama unfold, changed drastically. They all started shooting meaningful looks at Su Manjing, but he didn't even notice how pale it turned. Even though I knew I was just a debt payment, but to be called out like that in public, the shame still stung like a slap to the face.
Jiang Wanning felt me trembling. His left hand, resting on his knee, suddenly clenched. This piece of land is very important to the Jiang family. Besides, Gu Yanlin is far too timid. If I were to make a move right now, this bloody scene would probably give her nightmares.
Jiang Wanning suppressed the fury surging in her eyes. He patiently explained, he's allergic to alcohol. President Su about the contract. Su Man, however, felt that her face had been slighted. Humiliated and furious, he slammed his wine glass down hard onto the marble coffee table. This allergy is just an excuse. The bottom of the glass slammed violently against the hard marble, letting out a sharp, ear-splitting crack. Red wine splatters out, splattering across the table, like a glaring stain of blood. The sound was deafening. But for Jiang Wanning, this deafening blast was like a rusty saw, savagely sawing open his skull, stabbing straight into her most vulnerable auditory nerve. The fragile barrier of his sanity, which had been barely holding on, finally cracked in that very instant. Jiang Wanning's face instantly turned deathly pale. He was gripping the wine glass in his hand, his knuckles turning white. He's holding back. He was using every ounce of his willpower to hold back. He wanted to grab the wine bottle, the urge to smash this idiot's head open right here and now. Su Manjing was still shouting at the top of her lungs. Bro, you have to drink this wine today. If you don't drink, you're looking down on me. It's all just noise. Jiang Wanning closed her eyes for a moment. A cold sweat trickled down my temple. I'd been staying close to her, and I could sense that something was wrong. Miss Jiang, I saw the blood drain from her face, and the agony seeping through her tightly shut eyes. The air in the private room felt as if it were filled with lead, so heavy it was suffocating. Su Manjing, still riding the buzz from the alcohol, was shouting at the top of her lungs. The clinking of a wine glass against the table, one after another. It was like the death knell for a coming disaster. Everyone around is just watching the show. No one noticed the strange occurrence in the corner, but I was the only one who noticed. I was the closest to Jiang Wanning, so close that I could clearly sense the sudden shift in his energy. As a practitioner of traditional Chinese medicine, observation, listening, inquiry, and palpation are instincts etched into my very bones. I didn't spare a glance for the drunken oaf. My eyes were locked dead on Jiang Wanning's face. Jiang Wanning's breathing changed, those phoenix eyes. Her pupils were dilating violently at this moment. Finally, they contracted into a tiny needle point-like black dot. The whites of her eyes were rapidly filling with blood, a visible redness spreading before my very eyes. This is a sign of an overstimulated sympathetic nervous system. It's also the prelude to a severe bipolar episode, a sign that she's about to lose control. I know this state all too well on that stormy night, before she started choking me. That's the look. And in that very moment, the killing intent was palpable. Just in the nick of time, a faint sensation suddenly came from under the table. Jiang Wanning's entire body froze. Without me even realizing, my hand, which had been hanging by my side, had quietly reached out. I didn't take her hand, though. Instead, I just extended my slender little finger and gently, tentatively, hooked my pinky finger with Jiang Wanning's. Then, the tip of my finger twitched slightly. Against the edge of his sweaty, burning palm, he gave it a gentle scratch, again and again. This slight ticklish sensation, but it was like a faint yet firm electric current. In an instant, it pierced through the sensory defenses Jiang Wanning had sealed off from the noise. Yang Yi traced the lines on her palm, sending a tingling sensation all the way up her wrist, and crept up his spine, and finally burrowed into his brain, which felt like it was about to explode. The sharp red alarm bells in Jiang Wanning's mind. But for a fleeting moment, the sensation in his palm, like a kitten's gentle scratch, made him freeze. He slowly lowered his head. Her gaze shifted away from her intended victim and landed on me, right by her side. I didn't make a sound. Instead, I just mouthed the words, making no sound. Miss Jiang, don't be angry. Under the table, my pinky finger hooked hers again. It was a clumsy gesture, filled with both appeasement and plea. The tension in Jiang Wanning's jaw finally eased, just a little. The terrifying needle-like glint in her pupils slowly faded away. Her breathing grew heavy once more. He said nothing. With just a swift turn of his hand, the hand that was meant to strike someone, and let go of the wine glass. And under the table, he precisely caught the hand that was causing all the trouble. But this time, he didn't squeeze hard enough to hurt me. Instead, he took her soft, delicate hand and held it snugly, completely enveloped in my large, scorching palm. It was the grip of a drowning man clutching at his only piece of driftwood. It was also a mad dog finally sinking its teeth into its only bone. The wine cup was placed back on the table. Jiang Wanning leaned back and sank back into the sofa. Although the crimson in his eyes hadn't completely faded, but the ferocity in her eyes had already subsided. President Su, allow me to drink this on his behalf. But after this one glass, the profit margin on this contract, the profit
carrying the chill of late autumn rushed against my face. I took a deep breath, trying to wash away the stale, heavy smell of alcohol. Back in the private room. Even though Jiang Wanning took the drink for me, but the tense confrontational atmosphere still left my limbs feeling weak. The cold sweat on my back had soaked right through my shirt. Jiang Wanning was walking right beside me, except for the fact that her face was a few shades paler than usual. She looked no different from the haughty young lady she always was, but only I knew what my wrist gripped tightly in her hand was going through. Right now it feels like it's about to snap in two. Just as the bodyguard opened the door to the Ferrari, a voice tinged with sarcasm and a hint of mockery suddenly cut through the shadows of the parking lot. "Leaving so soon, President Jiang?" I felt the hand gripping my wrist tighten suddenly. A middle-aged woman with delicate, almost androgynous features. She strolled over leisurely with a few attendants in tow. It's Rong Shuir, the young lady of the Rong family. The Jiang family's longtime arch-rivals in the business world. Jiang Wanning stopped in her tracks. Her expression was indifferent. "To what do I owe the pleasure, President Rong?" Rong Shuir took a couple of steps closer. She lowered her voice and chuckled. "Nothing much. I just heard that Mr. Su's little get-together tonight really set our Mr. Jiang off. Wanning, and not here to be a housekeeper. In telling you, with your condition, you really shouldn't be out and about so much." My heart skipped a beat. But Rong Shuir didn't stop there. Instead, she took a step forward. In a voice so low that only a few people could hear, she continued venomously. "But I've heard things, you know. You've been taking your medication more and more frequently lately. What a shame, this entire Jiang family fortune. And whatever you do, don't end up like your crazy mother, Rong Shuir." The corners of his mouth curled into a cruel smirk. Each word deliberately and cruelly dug into Jiang Wanning's most festering wound. When he jumped from the 28th floor back then, and his brains splattered all over the ground, if you were to follow in his footsteps, then the high society crowd would have one less person to laugh at. All I heard was a loud buzzing in my head. I stared at Jiang Wanning in terror. That was her mother. That was the one thing she absolutely could not touch, the one thing that would set her off. And even the very source of the curse, the hereditary mental illness that plagued the family. The air was dead silent. The surrounding bodyguards all had their hands on their waists. All it would take was a single glance from Jiang Wanning. "Rong Shuir, you're not walking out of this parking lot on your own 2 feet tonight." However, the expected catastrophe didn't unfold under the dim, yellow glow of the streetlights. Jiang Wanning actually smiled. "Auntie Rong, you're funny. I really should take better care of myself. After all." She paused. She stepped forward and reached out to straighten Rong Shuir's collar. Her gentle tone sent a chill down one's spine. "After all, if I were to die, then who will be there to put the Rong family in their grave?" Rong Shuir's smile froze on her face. Before she could even react, Jiang Wanning had already patted her on the shoulder, as if she were brushing off something filthy. Then she turned, grabbed me, I was still in a daze, and pulled me straight into the car. The moment the car door slammed shut, the smile on Jiang Wanning's face was like a mask that had been torn to shreds, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Replacing it was a suffocating silence, heavy and grim. He gave the driver an order. His voice was hoarse, as if he were speaking through shards of glass. "Drive back to Jiangyuan." He then pressed a button on the armrest console. The black, soundproof partition between the front and back seats slowly rose up. The once spacious back seat was instantly transformed into a small, sealed, black cage. Inside this cage, it was just me and a beast on the verge of collapse. I huddled in the corner, not even daring to breathe. Jiang Wanning leaned back against the chair. Her head was tilted back, eyes closed. One of her hands was clutching the leather armrest of the chair, her fingernails digging deep into the leather, producing a grating sound that set one's teeth on edge. His other hand was pressed against his temple. He was trembling, but not out of fear, but from extreme suppression. What Rong Shuir just mentioned, crazy mom, jumped, brains. These words were on an endless loop in his mind, morphing into a piercing noise, mixed with the tapping sound from Su Manjing earlier. It was like a tsunami crashing inside his head. With the last shred of his sanity, he locked himself in this cramped space. She didn't want the driver up front to hear a thing, nor did she want any outsiders to see her in such a wretched state. I watched as he struggled in agony. It felt like something was twisting in my chest. She tentatively reached out her hand. I wanted to grab his sleeve. "Miss Jiang, don't touch me. Don't talk. Don't look at me. I'm too dangerous right now. I'm afraid if I open my eyes, I won't be able to stop myself and see blood in this tiny carriage, even if it means completely closing myself off from the only shield I have by my side." The carriage was plunged into absolute darkness and dead silence. Right now, a storm of unimaginable proportions must be raging inside Jiang Wanning's mind. I moistened my parched lips. As a doctor, I knew this was when the patient was at their most dangerous, and they're most volatile. As her medicine.
Instinctively, I felt like I had to do something, even if it's just handing him a glass of water or maybe, just like under the table earlier, I could gently hook my finger with his again. I mustered up my courage, leaning forward slightly. I wanted to break the suffocating silence. Miss Jiang. Shut up. In the darkness, the woman who had her eyes closed. The words hissed out from between her teeth, cold and violent, devoid of any warmth. I froze on the spot, terrified. I was left hanging in mid-air. I tried to reach for her hand and awkwardly stopped, but I saw. I told you not to speak. Jiang Wanning, using the last shred of her sanity, locked that beast in a cage, keeping it from pouncing on him. I, the innocent one, turned away to look out the window. Don't look at me. Don't look at me in this pathetic state. This wretched, insane appearance. My heart felt like it was being wrenched by something sharp. I understood the warning in his tone, and I understood the restraint behind that warning. He was at his breaking point, and yet he was still afraid of hurting me. My eyes stung, and silently pulled my hand away. But I stubbornly turned my head away and turned to face the car window, not making another sound. He even held his breath on purpose, trying to make himself as small as possible. A desperate, dead silence once again fell over the carriage. All that remained was the sound of the Buddhist prayer beads being flicked faster and faster. The grating sound of friction grew ever more piercing. The sound echoed in the enclosed space. It was like a final countdown to the inevitable explosion. Half an hour later, the Ferrari screeched to a halt in front of the main building of Jiangyuan. Before the car had even come to a full stop, Jiang Wanning had already thrown the car door open. He was like a hurricane, carrying a biting frost in its wake. She stormed out of the car in long, swift strides, stumbling as she went, but incredibly swift. He made a beeline for the villa's main entrance. The butler, who had been waiting at the door, had just stepped forward to greet him, but was forced back 2 steps by the terrifying, violent aura radiating from Jiang Wanning. "Get out of my way! Nobody comes near!" Jiang Wanning let out a low growl. He shoved aside the servants blocking his way and headed straight for the study on the 2nd floor. A deafening slam of the door echoed throughout the entire Jiang residence. Then came a series of complicated sounds. Then a dull thud echoed from the study, as if something heavy had been violently slammed against the wall. It was a destruction born from the need to vent her pain. I was sitting in the car. I stared at the tightly shut window, still clutching the calming sachet I hadn't dared to give her on the way. I had just gotten out of the car. Before I could even chase after her, the heavy mahogany door had already slammed shut right in front of me, cutting off all, but it couldn't block out the dull thud of something heavy slamming against the wall. The impact was so forceful it seemed to make the door frame shudder. Then came the sound of a bookshelf toppling over, the sound of books being ripped to shreds, and the sound of glassware being swept to the floor. The sharp, brittle sound of shattering glass. Inside, a one-sided destruction was taking place. It's over. This time, it's really over. The servants had long since fled downstairs in terror. The entire 2nd floor hallway was deserted, leaving just the butler and me. How did it come to this? Back at the he was clearly holding it together. The butler let out a heavy sigh. He lowered his voice trembling with a hint of despair. "It's because she's been holding it in for far too long, Mr. Gu. You don't know? The young lady can't stand it when people mention her mother. That's her inner demon. That Sticks from the wrong family deliberately provoked her in the parking lot today. The young lady didn't have an episode at that moment. She was just trying not to lose her composure in front of strangers. And she didn't want to scare you." My heart suddenly seized. I remembered that enclosed, dark space in the car. Jiang Wanning would rather crush her prayer beads than let herself look at me and scream at me, telling me not to look at him. So he was already on the verge of a breakdown back then. He locked himself away. It wasn't to throw a tantrum, but to find a place where no one was around to deal with the pain that was about to explode inside him. Then, another loud crash came from inside the room. This time, it sounded like a chair had been slammed against the door. The butler shuddered in fear. His face went pale. He pointed a trembling finger at the door. "This is bad. Something's not right about this noise." Before, when the young lady had an episode. After the smashing, she should be quiet now. But this time, she's looking for pain, to find pain. Her bipolar disorder was in full-blown manic episode. The voices in her head are enough to drive her mad. She needs physical pain to distract herself. "Attention, if you don't go in and stop the young lady, this won't be over until someone draws blood today." The words, shedding blood, pierced my ears like a needle. My mind flashed to Jiang Wanning's pale, slender hands, the same hands that shielded me from the wine and picked food for me. I was barely keeping it together in the car just now,
without hurting my hand.
Is he going to keep a spare key in there? Mr. Gu, give me the spare key. I'm a doctor. And his medicine as well. If I don't go in now, are we just going to wait for her to kill herself in there? The butler hesitated. Going in now would be like stepping into a cage with a wild beast. He could get hurt by mistake at any second. But hearing the increasingly out-of-control commotion from within, he gritted his teeth. He drew a red key from his waist. Mr. Gu, please be very careful. I took the key. The cold metallic touch fell into the palm of my hand. It was heavy. I walked up to the tightly shut red wooden door. Through the door panel, I could almost hear the woman inside, her breaths heavy and labored. It was the final, mournful cry of a trapped beast. I took a deep breath. Without another moment's hesitation, I inserted the key into the lock. The lock turned and pushed open the study door. It let out a heavy, dull thud. I was expecting to see a complete mess, with some lunatic smashing things around. But to my surprise, the room was dead silent. The lights were off. The heavy curtains blocked out the moonlight completely. The entire study was like a vast, pitch-black cave, devouring all light and sound. The air was thick with a heavy, suffocating smell. It was the smell of dust and blood. The hand holding my medical kit was trembling slightly. "Miss Jiang?" No one answered. Only that unsettling aura of death lingered, weighing heavily on my heart. I gulped. Guided by the faint beam of light seeping in from the hallway, I tiptoed my way inside. The floor was littered with shards of porcelain and torn-up book pages. Every step I took made a faint sound. In the quiet of the room, every sound was jarringly loud. I was looking for her. Finally, in the farthest corner of the study, and there she was, Jiang Wanning, sitting on the floor. Her back was against the bookshelf, her long legs casually bent at the knees. She just sat there, so quiet in the darkness, like a plaster statue that had lost its soul. It was like my heart suddenly clenched. I had never seen Jiang Wanning like this before. No fury, no sound. Only a bottomless void and numbness, as if she had heard the sound of footsteps. Jiang Wanning faintly lifted her eyelids. Her phoenix-like eyes were unfocused, pitch black, like a pool of stagnant water. In his world, my voice sounds so distant and indistinct. Right now, his mind is flooded with countless sharp, piercing noises. The sound of the wind as his mother jumped from the building, the sound of shattering bones, Rong Shuer's vicious curses, and the deafening clink of clashing wine glasses. It's too loud. It feels like the blood vessels in my brain are about to burst. Those sounds were like rusty saws, sawing back and forth, cutting through her nerves. Jiang Wanning stared numbly at the tiny crimson flame at her fingertips. Since the pain in my head won't go away, then let's just cover it up with another kind of pain, one that's more direct, more intense. If the physical pain is greater, the pain in my head will go away. This was the law of survival he had learned in the asylum over many years. Jiang Wanning raised her hand, her face devoid of any expression. She stared at the menacing black thorn tattoo on the back of her left hand. She got it to cover up scars from the past, a symbol of pain and bondage. The next second, then he did something that made my blood run cold. He was actually holding that cigarette, the one burning at its brightest and hottest, and slowly, without any hesitation, pressed it against the form tattoo on the back of his hand. In that instant, it was as if I could hear the sizzle of flesh burning under the intense heat, a sickening, acrid smell of burning. The smell of burning flesh instantly filled the air, and bathed in that bleak red glow. Jiang Wanning didn't even bat an eyelid. The scene was absolutely horrifying. It was just too brutal. My pupils contracted violently. It felt like all the blood in my body rushed to my head in that instant. My instincts as a doctor and my heartache for the patient I had protected all this way, and in that moment it completely shattered my fear of who she was. There was no heiress of the capital's elite in my eyes, and no creditor either. Right now, all I see is a patient, slowly destroying herself. The medical kit in my hand crashed heavily to the floor with a loud thud. The bottles and jars inside clattered and scattered across the floor, but I couldn't care less about any of that. I threw myself recklessly at the woman in the corner. "Jiang Wanning, are you insane?" I rushed up to him. Without a second thought, I reached out and knocked the still smoldering cigarette right out of his hand. With trembling hands, I cupped Jiang Wanning's face, her left hand a mangled mess of flesh and blood from the burn. Right in the center of her once exquisite and sharp thorn tattoo, there was now a charred, sunken circular pit. The skin around it was red, swollen, and blistering. The sight was horrifying. How could you? How could you do this to yourself? Doesn't it hurt? Jiang Wan, my voice choked and broken, the cigarette. It knocked away. Only at this moment did it seem like she had finally snapped out of that closed-off world of hers. She blinked slowly. She was just crying there. But the one who was actually in pain was me.
Why does she look like she's in even more pain than I am?
Kneeling on the ground amidst a floor covered in broken glass, his hands were clutching Jiang Wan tightly. Your left hand, the one you just injured. By the faint light, I saw the wound clearly. In the center of that black foreign tattoo, which once symbolized abstinence and danger, was now split open, the flesh seared and raw from the intense heat, the black thorns tangled with the curling, raw red flesh. And all around it, a horrifying ring of blisters was rapidly forming. It hurts just to look at it. As a medical student, I've seen countless gruesome wounds, but never before have I felt a pain in my heart quite like this. Even her breaths were trembling. How could he bring himself to do it? How could she do this to herself? Jiang Wanning. Only then did it feel like he was being forcibly dragged out of that sealed, noise-filled world. Slowly, he rolled his eyes. Her gaze fell upon my anxious face. The fear in my eyes was still there. But what filled them even more was a sadness and pity that seemed almost overwhelming. Pity. To think someone would look at a madwoman like me with an expression like that. Jiang Wanning's lips twitched stiffly, but the hollow, deathly stillness in her eyes remained. Instead, the pleasure of her self-destruction was interrupted and was instead filled with a violent, seething irritation. Who let you in? He tried to pull his hand back, but I held on tight. Gu Yanhai, I told you to get out. Get out before I decide to strangle you. Someone as filthy and broken as me. A monster with the blood of a madman flowing through its veins. I deserve to rot in the darkness. Anyone else? Hearing a warning so full of murderous intent would have been scared out of their wits and bolted for the door. But I didn't. I looked into his eyes and they were so empty it was terrifying. I watched as he deliberately raised all those spikes on his body trying to push me away. I didn't let go. Instead, I gripped his hand even tighter. I'm not leaving. I'm your doctor. I'm leaving. What about your hand? Do you want to cripple him? He yelled at her. This little rabbit, who's usually too timid to even raise his voice, suddenly yelled. Jiang, the Yama of the Beijing elite circle. Wanning froze. In the split second, she was stunned. In a panic, I fumbled a tube of burn ointment from my pocket that I always carry with me. With trembling fingers, I twisted the cap open and squeezed out a large dollop of the clear, cool ointment. Don't move, please. Don't touch me. And yet his touch was impossibly gentle. The cool pad of his finger was coated with ointment, carefully applying it along the edge of the gruesome wound. It was a sensation Jiang Wanning had never experienced before. It doesn't hurt. It's cool and so soft. That cooling sensation spreading along her nerve endings, and miraculously, it overwhelmed the searing pain that had been piercing her to the core. Jiang Wanning's body, once so tense, the muscles that wanted to push me away and without even realizing it, began to relax. In the dim light, she gazed at the man kneeling before her. He was trembling. He was afraid. And yet he stubbornly held out his own mangled hand, as if he were holding some rare, priceless treasure. After applying the ointment, I lowered my head and leaned closer to the wound, and gently blew on it. There, the pain will go away if I blow on it. Jiang Wanning, don't do this. I'll make you better. Don't hurt yourself. It's going to hurt. The words "it will hurt" struck like a sledgehammer, and shattered the ice that had encased Jiang Wanning's heart for over 20 years. Ever since I was a child, everyone was afraid of her, afraid I'd go mad, afraid I'd hurt them. Even my own father, when I have an episode. All they would do is have me locked away, or give me a sedative, or just stay far, far away from me. Her eyes were filled with disgust and fear. No one had ever asked if she was in pain. No one had ever felt sorry for the pain she carried. Jiang Wanning, all she felt was a lump of wet cotton stuck in her throat. And at that very moment, it miraculously vanished. Instead, it was replaced by the sound of this boy's broken voice, and the sound of his clumsy, gentle humming. That voice. It's so beautiful. More beautiful than any music in the world. A faint glimmer of focus slowly appeared in Jiang Wanning's hollow, lifeless eyes. That glimmer of focus gradually sharpened until it finally formed a reflection of me. The ointment was applied, a transparent, gelatinous layer, covering the charred and gruesome wound. 隔绝了空气 and temporarily numbed the heart-piercing, burning pain. But Jiang Wanning didn't get any better. On the contrary, once the searing pain that had been numbing her nerves subsided, a different, deeper, and far more terrifying reaction swept over her. Jiang Wanning's entire body was seized by uncontrollable, violent tremors. The air conditioning in the study wasn't even set very low, but it was as if she were naked, thrown into an icehouse. It was the aftermath of a bipolar episode, physical collapse from the sharp drop in adrenaline, someone who had lived in darkness for years, the exhaustion that follows extreme narcissism and self-destruction. In the silent space, I could even hear the sound of his teeth chattering uncontrollably. In front of Jiang Wanning, her hands were still cradling his injured left hand. I can feel him trembling, and I could clearly sense his helplessness and vulnerability in that moment. That same Jiang Wanning, the one who was so powerful and untouchable in the capital's social circles. The same woman who was just trying to strangle me a moment ago. The same Jiang Wanning who told me to get lost, but now she was as fragile as a piece of paper, ready to tear at the slightest touch. "Are you cold?" Jiang Wanning didn't answer, or maybe she couldn't make a sound at all. She just mechanically tried to pull her hand away from mine. She just wanted to curl back up in that dark corner of hers. "Look. Don't look at me. I'm a mess. It's too ugly." I watched him shrink away from me. My heart felt like a ball of vinegar-soaked cotton had been stuffed into it, a sour, aching tightness. It's because she couldn't stand to hear others curse him. Her mother was a mad woman. She can't stand to hear those curses. That's what drove her to become like this. He's not a monster. He's just a sick man who's never been loved. "I'm not leaving."
I sniffled. The next moment, I did something bold. I shuffled forward on my knees. Even though the carpet was littered with shards of porcelain and glass, a sharp stinging pain shot through my knees. But I didn't stop. I walked up to Jiang Wanning, and then I opened my arms, like a small bird trying to warm a frozen traveler, and without a second thought, I held her in a tight embrace. Jiang Wanning's body, which had been trembling violently, in that instant, it was as if she had been frozen by a spell. It suddenly went rigid. "What is this?" "Warm, soft. A touch that's so full of life. Not the kind of contact that recoils in fear, nor was it the forced submission of someone trying to stay alive. "Miss Jiang, don't tremble. Stop hurting. Will you?" "I'm right here." Jiang Wanning sat there stiff as a board. Her hands were suspended in mid-air, at a complete loss. The voice in her head, the one that had always been screaming for him to die. Suddenly, it all went quiet, and in her world, only the sound of the boy in her arms remained. "You told me to get out, but I'm your medicine. How can a cure leave its patient? I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. I am your medicine." Just 3 simple words. "I'm here." Like a ray of light, it brutally tore through the dark clouds that had loomed over Jiang Wanning for more than 20 years. In that instant, Jiang Wanning felt something begin to sprout in the heart that had long been barren and withered. That bone-deep chill that seeped from her very core was fading away at an astonishing rate. In its place, a scorching heat surged up from the very core of her being. He didn't despise her. He had seen her at her most insane, the most broken, and most unbearable side. But still, she chose to hold herself tight. A terrifying redness welled up in Gu Yanting's eyes. But this time, he didn't push my hand away as it hung in the air. It slowly descended, trembling, and landed on my back. The moment that uninjured right hand touched my back, it was as if his entire body had been struck by a high-voltage current, that long-lost, living warmth of a human body, and it shot frantically through his fingertips, searing into his body. For the first time in 25 years, it was the first time Jiang Wanning had ever been seen at her most vulnerable and hideous in the throes of her illness. No one was avoiding her like she was the plague. No one tried to sedate her. No one shackled her with chains. And no one looked at her with the eyes of someone staring at a monster. There was only warmth, the man who carried the scent of medicine. Ignoring the shards of glass scattered all over the floor, he knelt before her and opened his arms to her and pulled her filthy, broken body into his arms. "The pain will stop now. I'm here." Those words were the final key, unlocking the Pandora's box of her desires. In that single second, the ashen, empty void in Jiang Wanning's eyes rapidly crumbled. In its place was a force that erupted from the very depths of her soul. A maddening craving, intense enough to burn away all reason, was still not enough. Simply holding herself like this was nowhere near enough. Every cell in her body was screaming. It was the desperate rebound of skin hunger, suppressed to its absolute limit. She had been cold for far too long. This body has been left to rot in the darkness for far too long. Now, suddenly seeing the light. All he wanted was to cling to this light for dear life. Gu Yexing. The next second, the person who had been passive just a moment ago suddenly moved, even with a burn on the back of his left hand, freshly treated with medicine, and he didn't seem to feel any pain at all. He suddenly tightened his arms. The force of that sudden movement was astonishingly strong. It felt like he was going to snap my waist in two, and just like that, the last sliver of space between them vanished completely. "Miss Jiang." I started to panic. She was so strong. So strong, it was suffocating me. But Jiang Wanning couldn't hear a thing. Her sanity has completely snapped. What's controlling this body now is an instinct called greed. He lowered his head. That pale, beautiful face buried itself in the crook of my neck. It wasn't just about the scent. It was the tip of a cold, possessive nose, pressing against my warm skin, sending shivers down my spine. It smells so good." Jiang Wanning murmured, her words slurred. Then I felt a warm, wet touch. She was caressing it with her lips. Her touch on my skin. It wasn't just caressing. It was because she was so desperate for that tangible sense of touch.
Jiang Wanning couldn't even stop herself from parting her lips and gently grinding her teeth against that small, soft patch of flesh on the side of my neck. Jiang Wanning, gently. It tickles. The study was dead silent. The only sounds were the faint rustle of fabric and the woman's increasingly intoxicated breathing. That morbid attachment festered and grew wildly in this dark corner. Jiang Wanning's eyes were closed, her cheek pressed tightly against my carotid artery, listening to the strong heartbeat coming from there. Her frenzied, restless heart finally settled back into place as if by a miracle. It's alive. And warm. This moment all to herself lasted for a long, long time. Jiang Wanning finally stopped. You came to me of your own accord, since you're holding me. Then don't even think about letting go for the rest of your life. He was choking me. I could barely breathe. In a daze, I listened to this vow that felt more like a curse. I had no idea yet. And in that very moment, with my own hands, I opened the cage that held the beast and offered myself as the sacrifice and became a permanent part of the cage. The air in the study was finally no longer so tense it was suffocating. On the verge of destruction, all the violent energy in the air seemed to dissolve in that long, tight embrace, began to recede like the tide. The crimson in Jiang Wanning's eyes faded. Her sanity slowly returned, but he didn't let go. Instead, it was as if he had found a switch that could soothe her very soul, and that switch was the man holding her. I was kneeling on the ground, my legs have long since fallen asleep, plus I was still stuck in the position where she had me in a death grip. My back is about to break. Miss Jiang, are you feeling any better? The floor is cold and it's covered in broken glass. Let's get up first, okay? Jiang Wanning didn't move. He rested his chin on me. But her arms around me didn't loosen, not even by a millimeter. Then, you'll have to let go of me first. I'll go tidy up the medicine box. Your hand means to be rebandaged. Before he could finish his sentence, the woman, who just moments ago was as quiet as a big cat, suddenly, her brow furrowed. He gasped. Her head snapped up. Her beautiful, deathly pale face contorted with undisguised agony. My heart sank. My instincts as a doctor kicked in, and I tensed up instantly. What's wrong? Where does it hurt? My heart sank. My instincts as a doctor kicked in, and I tensed up instantly. Jiang Wanning lowered her eyelids. She raised her left hand, the one that had been burned, and waved it in front of me. The pain in my hand. It's a sad kind of pain. I stared at the gruesome wound. My heart softened. I was about to say. Jiang Wanning raised her right hand again and pressed her temples. Her brows were knotted in a deep frown, and my head hurts. It feels like a saw is cutting through it. Before I could even say a word, he then placed his hand over his heart again and stared at me with a distant, sorrowful look. And it hurts here too. I was stunned. That's where her heart is. Is this chest pain angina? Or is it an irregular heartbeat? Her last episode must have caused some complications, I said, reaching out to check his pulse. Jiang Wanning pulled away from my hand. Those eyes were fixed right on me. Her tone was both plaintive and dangerous. If you leave, then my whole body will ache. My hand froze in mid-air. Okay, now I get it. These are not complications. This is just plain shameless. The once ruthless and decisive socialite of the capital is now playing the sick card. This is a blatant setup. I let out a helpless sigh. And not leaving. I just want to help you back to your room to rest. Jiang Wanning stared at me for a few seconds, as if weighing the truth of my words. Finally, she mercifully lessened her grip a little, but she was still holding onto my wrist. Instead, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he reached out his hand. Resigned to my fate, I became her crutch and helped the tall woman up from the carpet. Jiang Wanning was practically putting all her weight on me. Her scorching body heat seeped through the thin fabric of her clothes. It was so hot it made my ears burn. The two of us stepped out of the devastated study. The master bedroom was right next door. Pushing open the heavy double doors, a chill, snow-like fragrance washed over me. Jiang Wanning's bedroom was immense. It was spacious, almost to the point of being cold and desolate. In the very center stood a massive custom-made black bed. Please, lie down and get some rest. I helped her over to the bed. Just as I was about to turn and head back to my room, my wrist was grabbed. A powerful force yanked me back. I was yanked down completely. I was thrown face down onto the soft, large bed. Before I could even struggle to my feet, a delicate, soft body was already pressing down on me. I was scared out of my mind. I scrambled away on all fours, desperate to get out. I heard Jiang Wanning's voice, and then she wrapped her arms around me from behind, with one hand, and locked its grip around my waist. Then a long leg possessively pinned both of mine down. Sleep here tonight. This isn't proper. Men and women should not be so intimate. Besides, you're my medicine. If my medicine isn't by my side, what if she has an episode in the middle of the night? Do you want me to die in pain? But there was no. But Jiang Wanning buried her face in the crook of my neck and took a deep breath. The soothing scent on me. Her agitated nerves finally calmed completely, and she fell asleep. He closed his eyes.
Her voice was thick with exhaustion and contentment. "You're just chatting with Yan, aren't you?" "Yeah, right. So you're not going to move, huh? Now you're all over me, wrapped around me like an octopus. What is this supposed to mean?" Jiang Wanning's arm was draped across my waist. As for her injured left hand, to avoid touching the wound, it was deliberately held in the air, resting on me. And her leg was even more possessively pressed against mine, leaving me completely pinned down. Slowly, the breathing behind me became steady and even. Jiang Wanning was truly asleep. This was probably the fastest and most peaceful sleep Shed had in years.
My body, which had been so tense, finally began to relax at the sound of her steady breathing, and slowly began to relax as well. I turned my head. By the moonlight, I glanced at the sleeping woman's profile behind me. Her face, usually so cold and distant, was now completely defenseless. Her long eyelashes were cast downwards. She actually looked kind of sweet and docile. She really thinks she's a baby, doesn't she? Before I knew it, the fear in my heart had faded quite a bit, and in its place a sense of helpless resignation. Forget it. Considering how much pain he's in today, consider it a bitter pill to swallow. I sighed. In the warmth of her embrace, inhaling the scent of cedarwood, and before I knew it, my eyes closed as well. But after I drifted off to sleep, the woman who was supposed to be sound asleep slowly opened her eyes. In the darkness, Jiang Wanning's eyes were completely clear, holding not a trace of sleep. There wasn't a trace of sleepiness in her eyes. She gazed at the man beside her. The corners of her lips curled into a satisfied smirk. "I've got you. Don't even think about running away for the rest of your life."